welcome to the podcast, Emily. You posted on Facebook about DEI, and I said, "Hey, will you come on the podcast and talk about your story?"
Yes.
So, in relation to DEI, what was your post about?
So my post was just about my experience as far as being a female in a male-dominated industry, and just kind of what that's looked like. I had a lot of experience in the construction industry, and went through a divorce and came out of it, and was given plenty of opportunities for probably more so the female roles in like administrative type roles, and really kind of struggled to find some solid ground in which I could build a career. And I eventually got hired on with the company I work for now, and I came in at, again, a very kind of introductory role, and they quickly were able to see my talents, my abilities, and I quickly was able to get promoted and rose up to a little bit more of a prominent position in that company. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what DEI looks like. I think that people think it has to do with sexual orientation or race. And although those are really important platforms or important parts to address, someone like me who, from the naked eye, I'm just, I'm a privileged suburban white woman. You wouldn't think it would be a struggle. But I found that the areas that I had my talents and my abilities, and the areas that I wanted to grow in my career, were very stunted by this belief that, women can't do everything men can do. And men don't want to listen to a woman telling you what to do on a job site. And so I was just so fortunate about being able to find a company that saw that, gave me those opportunities. And I just wanted to point that out because I think that most people on social media probably look more like me and identify more with me. And it's a lot easier to maybe have empathy when you see how it affects people that look a little bit more like you. And that's why I posted it. And the other reason is because I had my fourth back surgery over the summer of 2024. And it was an unexpected kind of emergency sort of thing. And coming back from that, again, working in a construction industry, even though I do most of my project management from my desk at home or my desk in the office, I still had to have accommodations made for recovering from a back surgery. And they just swooped in and they were like, okay, like, how long do you need to work from home? The commute was a really difficult commute to make after recovering from back surgery. They accommodated that. They brought in a standing desk. They brought in a stool and just made huge accommodations for me to be able to continue to work, continue to have my job, do the best possible job I could do with it after recovering from back surgery. And I think that's another aspect that people don't understand that DEI encompasses, is making accommodations, whether it be for someone that has, hearing or sight issues, someone that's a nursing mother, someone that needs to park in, a closer location to their office, all of those different things and accommodations that come into play that people just don't think about. And in reading and researching, one of the things that a statement that was made was, privilege is invisible to someone that has it, and how it's so easy. I don't think about what it would be like if I couldn't see, or if I couldn't hear, or if I couldn't type, because those are all things I don't have to take into consideration. And so many other people do. And when you don't have to take sexual orientation, or you don't have to take race into accountability, it's invisible to you, and that privilege is completely lost. And that's something I really wanted to reach out to people on social media and try to get some of that across. So
I thought your post was great, and this part explaining it is even better. So
okay.
thank you for that.
Of course.
Um, can you give? I mean, you gave examples of what DEI has done in general as far as accommodations after your surgery.
Yes.
Any other things that you can think of in the on your journey to the career position that you're at now?
Um, what I can reflect on, maybe not so much what DEI has done for me, but what DEI, the importance of it for others in the workplaces, in the places that I worked. So, for example, I worked for a railroad contractor. I think that's a pretty blanket description of where I worked. And I was told, using these words specifically, you are allowed to hire the Mexican mafia, but you are not allowed to hire gangbangers and thugs. And that those were directives given to me.
I didn't know gangbangers and thugs were applying for railroad jobs, but
I know, right? I think there was some indication as to what color they might be.
mm,
And that I went to somebody higher up and said that you can't, this is not a directive you can give me. And they just said, well, we all have our opinions, and that's that person's opinion. And, I would suggest you go with it. And having directives, being told to, if someone sounded like a minority on the phone, or if their name looked like a minority on an application, I saw how those were dealt with, and I saw the reactions of that. And
and and how were those dealt with?
they were dismissed. They were not given opportunities. And one of the comments, I don't know if you read through the comments on my Facebook
No, I
post.
did not. So let's
Okay.
hear it.
Good for you. There was a comment on there, and it was actually written by a man that I know because he owned a business. He no longer does, but he owned a business in an area right outside Kansas City, a suburb of Kansas City. For I think 40 years he owned the business. And his comment was, I just want to be able to hire the most qualified person. And I responded and said, did you even read my post? Because I feel like that, I feel like that was the point of my post. And he said, yes, but I don't want to hire perverts and degenerates and people who think that they're a man or a woman, or that choose to be with someone of the same sex. And I didn't do a whole lot of back and forth with him, but because to me, it was just proof of like, this is exactly why we need,
Yeah, yeah.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. Your first statement was, I want to hire the most qualified person. And then your second statement was, except for these people, based on my morals, based on, what I see as guidelines and boundaries for who should and should not be included in the employment pool. And that just, I was like, and this is somebody that has owned a business for 40 years. And he's, for all the world to see on social media, saying, but I won't hire these people. So, so you don't want to hire the best person for the job.
Yeah. I like to remind people that white men have had affirmative action in America for 400 years.
Yes. Yep.
And the other funny thing is, like, if you're born white and male, typically in the world, but specifically in the United States, you've won the lottery for all the reasons you just kind of went over.
Yep. And I have heard a lot of people, I think an interesting comment that I hear often is, a Black person got my job, a woman got my job. And my immediate reaction is, that's such an interesting point of privilege to automatically assume it was your job. It wasn't the Black man got the job or a woman got the job. It's, they got my job.
That's well
Well,
said. Yes.
quite an assumption to make, that was already your job. And I think that when you have a more diverse, and that includes, women, varying ethnicities, religions, socioeconomic status, the more varied and more diverse that is, you're just going to have a happier staff. You're going to have more creativity, better ideas, more ingenuity, just more creativity all around. And I am the happiest I've ever been as far as my employment. And I truly believe that has so much to do with the diversity that I see every day at my office. So I'm very
What
fortunate.
Yeah, it's great to hear.
Yeah.
Um, what's your hot take on the Trump administration? Getting rid of all DEI programs and all federal agencies, and just the nonstop attack for the last 2 weeks on DEI. Saying the plane crash was because of DEI. So, what's your hot take on all that?
Again, I think that it is a very privileged point of view. I think that, I mean, I don't believe that he's had to work for much his entire life. I don't think that he's had to climb any ladder of any kind. And to just have such a narrow point of view, and to not, again, it goes back to this idea that white men are being discriminated against and white men are losing out on all of these opportunities. And that is not, if I just believe that anybody who really researches and does their background work on this, which, let's be honest, most of the people that are voting for him are not doing that work. When you really look at the policies and the procedures and the steps that are expected to be taken with DEI, like that's not what's happening. What's happening is that it's evening the playing field. It's giving people who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to sit in front of somebody, present their skills, present their education abilities, and have an opportunity that otherwise they might be overlooked for. And that's it. It's that simple. And I don't know how we can demonize that. I don't know how that can somehow become something bad. And I just think that we're taking steps decades backwards. I mean, this is just I'm trying to stay well informed and also maintain some level of mental health.
Yeah.
So it's been extremely difficult to see what he's doing. I had a friend that told me, and I haven't seen this picture, but I have a friend that told me that they saw a video of a janitor or a maintenance person painting over the words
Oh, I saw that too. Yeah.
diversity. And I'm
Hmm.
like, what a visual representation of what's happening. We're just erasing all of that.
Yeah, it's
And
whitewashing, right?
yes,
All that right out of the.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. And I also just think, again, I want to reference the right people to reference, but Tim Wise, I don't know if you've listened to much of Tim Wise. He's a brilliant man, and he talks so much about how America was built on this idea of like, well, the white rich person doesn't want to work and he doesn't want to go to war. So how do you get someone to work for you and fight for you? And the only way they could do that was by causing division, was creating, because if the slaves and the poor white man got together and was like, this is not cool, and they really, worked together to create labor unions, the rich white man would have been in a lot of trouble. And so I think that the whole part of corporate America and all of this, it is very intentional to create division. And I just, I'm hurting, and I'm empathizing with people who are being discriminated against, because we're just taking so many steps back.
I think it's really interesting. You bring up a great point in the fact that um, the folks, the numbers show that Trump voters were a lot of Trump voters were paycheck to paycheck individuals.
Yeah.
They were voting, they were hoping the Republicans would help them with that by lowering consumer prices.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the tagline for the Republican Party should be the bait and switch party. Also, fear of the other party,
Mm-hmm.
because they're doing exactly what you're talking about. And that is they're trying to divert attention away from the billionaires, all the money being sucked out of the middle class up to the upper class, and blame it on immigrants, blame it on DEI, and
Yep.
not on the economic system that they have put in place, the money they've put into politics. And so this is what we get. We just get a confused populace,
Yep.
and the Republicans, Fox News, historically Rush Limbaugh, all those folks, pointed the fingers at the other instead of us. And when I
Yep.
say us, I mean the rich white Republican conservatives. Because on
Yes.
the Democratic side, you've got people fighting for trying to get money out of politics.
Mhm.
I know there's been talk about term limits, all the things that would benefit people.
Right.
And I don't want to turn this into a Democratic versus Republican, podcast, but just, you've got the party of fear, and then I think you have the party of hope.
Well, and I also had someone describe it as it's no longer Democrats against Republicans, it's empaths versus narcissists.
Yeah,
I
there's
mean,
a lot of that.
it's who are we worried about? And most of the people that I talk about or talk to about the elections that voted for Trump are, this is what I want America to look like for me. This is how I want the country to look like for me. And I think most Democrats are talking about, this is what I want the world to look like for everyone. This is how I want the world, it isn't so much focused on, how am I affected by this? How is this going to make my life better? But how is it going to make it better for everyone? And if I have to take a pay cut, if I have to pay a little bit more in taxes to make it better for everyone, I'm willing to do that. But I'm not willing to do that if it's only going to make it better for the top 5%. Not going to do that. So, yeah, but someone had said to me the empath versus narcissist, and I was like, that seems fitting.
Very fitting.
Unfortunately. And there's a fun cartoon that I've seen where there's a man sitting at the end of a, conference room table, and he has, a pile of cookies. Do you know which one I'm talking about here?
No, I haven't. I don't think I've seen this one.
Okay, so he has a pile of this mound of cookies. There's probably 1,000 cookies. And to his left is a white, worker, and he has 10 cookies. And to his right is a Hispanic worker who has crumbs. And he looks at the white worker that has 10 cookies, and he points to the Hispanic worker that has crumbs and says, he's trying to take your cookies. As he's sitting at the end of the table with this mound of cookies. And that's what we're doing. And yeah, it's a lot of what is happening right now is terrifying to me.
I think American consumers and also business owners are going to really regret the fear mongering and deportation of immigrants.
Oh
I've
yeah.
heard a lot of people talk about one of the greatest economic boosts to the American economy is undocumented workers. They pay Social Security, but they get none of the benefits.
Yep.
And if the work's not there, they go home. They don't take they don't have access to unemployment, that kind of stuff. So it's not like we woke up yesterday and like, oh my gosh, 17% of our construction sites are Hispanic.
Right. Yep. And when you look at the, agriculture industry and
Mm,
how it's
mhm.
going to affect that, and they are not going to find, um, 16-year-old kids to pick strawberries for $6 an hour or $7 an hour, or whatever it is they're paying. They're not going to be able to fill those empty slots. And if they are, the amount of money they're going to have to pay is going to just be, again, detrimental to our economy and to what we're expected to pay for groceries, which is already, but that's another promise he made that doesn't seem to be coming to fruition.
Yeah. I travel all around the country, and I've yet to meet anyone who's lost a job to an immigrant. Would
Right.
love to meet that person or those people because
Yes.
I just never come across them.
Yep.
Um, One last thing before we go. One of the biggest misnomers about DEI is they're hiring unqualified people. You want to
Correct.
talk about how DEI actually works in that regard?
Yes. Well, let me first give you a little bit of background on me. So my degree is public administration with a minor in psychology. So I do have a good understanding of how government works. That's what I went to school for. And I spent 17 years being a stay-at-home mom to 5 children, and also helping my ex-husband build a business that revolved around construction. And so my work experience was not necessarily, something you could put on paper, although,
Right.
I could, but I spent time, looking at blueprints and, that type of stuff. And so my work experience wasn't necessarily, my degree wasn't necessarily, what they
Right.
were looking for, but my experience, and when you put it on paper, was exactly what they were looking for. And again, I I feel like as I entered the workforce after being a quote unquote stay-at-home mom for 17 years, but I had this experience that I wanted to utilize in the construction industry. And the beginning of that journey, it was very much like pushed aside what my, what my experience was. And I was just like, okay, if I just get my foot in the door, I can prove, that I have these abilities. And I did that. And part of that experience was I was given more responsibility. I was asked to be in charge of construction sites. I was asked to go in and do project management, but I was kept at a secretary's pay. And
Yeah.
it became, and it was always the moving target. It was always the, well, if you do this, we'll give you a title change, or if you do this, we'll give you a raise. And it never happened. And so as far as, hiring people that do not qualify for the job or do not get the experience, it isn't so much that it's putting people that do have the experience, do have the knowledge, education, and ability to do the job, putting them in a place where they have the opportunity. They're able to prove themselves. And again, I was willing to do that. I wasn't expecting to step into any position and just be handed an opportunity, but it's that I put in the work, I put in the extra time, stayed late, came in early, and created processes and procedures and did things that I wasn't expected to do, but did to prove my worth. And finally found a company who was like, okay, you're doing it all. We're not handing this to you, but we're recognizing what you're doing. And we're not putting you in a box, and we're not saying, well, you're a woman, so you go file this paperwork. And also just being given the credit. I think that there's a lot of women that work really, really hard in these male-dominated industries, and all of the things that they do are kind of pushed aside and given credit to somebody else. And so what diversity, equity, and inclusion did for me was I'm not doing a job I don't know how to do. I'm not doing a job I'm not good at, that I don't have the education for, and that I don't have the abilities for. It presented that in a way that gave me the opportunity to prove myself. It gave me the opportunity to, having someone that just was like, my gender was set aside. What is she doing? And that's what was, opened those doors for me. And I'm forever grateful, forever grateful.
I don't think people quite understand as far as affirmative action or DEI, the entry point, the standards, the requirements are not lowered for people.
Right.
You have to be qualified.
Right.
It's just that, hey, if you have 100 applicants that are qualified, we're going to pick women, we're going to pick disabled folks, we're going to pick over, white men who have had full access to all this stuff, like I said, for 400 years. And
Yeah.
as a white man, I get it. I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Also veterans move to the front of the line, which they should. There's,
Yeah.
And we're talking about a small percentage. This isn't like, that's the thing. It's kind of like with trans athletes in college. And I don't know if you saw this clip, but Congress had a hearing and they said, how many athletes do you have in NCAA? And he's like, oh, 30,000, I think. How many trans athletes do you have? He goes, oh, less than 10.
Yep.
It's just like the conservative media has turned all these things, just
Yes.
into the worst things that actually, they don't exist in that form anyway.
Right. Yep. And one of the other ways that I've tried to describe, kind of where we sit as far as the racial stuff goes, and is we've been sitting at a Monopoly table. Okay.
Oh yeah.
And you and I have been playing for 400
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, we got all the good locations.
Right.
And we can charge big prices for those.
Yes. And we're asking people to sit down at the Monopoly table and play with us and go, you know what? You have the same rules. You get $200 when you collect go. You can, and then they're like, well, wait, you've bought all the property. You have stacks of cash. What's going on? Like, this isn't fair. And everyone, I mean, it seems like this administration thinks, well, we're giving them the opportunity to sit down at the table, but they're not taking into consideration that you and I have been playing for 400 years. And we're asking people to sit down at the table and giving them no accommodations for the fact that they're just getting finally able to sit down and play.
By the way, this is the exact reason why they're trying to get rid of any history of
Yes.
systemic racism,
Yep.
because if there's no problem, you don't have to do anything to fix it. So if we just
Right.
erase the problem of 400 years of systemic racism,
Yep.
I could go down the laundry list of, how African Americans have been discriminated against time and time and time and time again, and then told by conservatives, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps
Yes.
with one arm, one leg tied behind your
Yes.
back. Let's see how that works out for you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just awful.
Yep.
Well,
Absolutely.
Emily, I appreciate you sharing your story, because I
Of
just
course.
thought it
Yeah.
was a
Thank
great,
you.
great post, and I really wanted to see um, a white female, even though obviously DEI does favor females, which as it should, because it's
Hmm.
women historically obviously dealing with the same kind of problems
Yep.
uh, as far as access to employment and access to equal pay, and women obviously are still doing the same job, getting paid less than men.
Yep. Absolutely.
But I'm going to add a clip to the end of this from my first documentary called What Would Jesus Do on Election Day?" But there's
Mhm.
a great explanation about how whiteness is the backdrop for women and people of color, and I think this clip will really explain a lot for everybody. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
The group that owns history, the group that is able to define reality, is a group that has power. When you tell a Native American that Columbus discovered America, and when teachers test students as to their knowledge and ask a question, true, false, Columbus discovered America, and all the white students say that's Mickey Mouse and that it's true, but Native Americans say, that it isn't true, they get an incorrect score and are told that there's something wrong in their intelligence or knowledge of history. This is what I call cultural oppression, where the reality of one group, and that's oftentimes related to whiteness as well. That's something that we were referring to, that whiteness is an invisible standard that is enforced on individuals. And because whiteness is a background, white Western ways, it is invisible to people who are white Americans, but it's not invisible to people of color. It's like a fish that is in a bowl of water swimming, doesn't see the water until they're out of it. Yet the water represents something toxic and unhealthy to people of color. And this is where we get the clash of racial realities. Now, you may ask, whose racial reality is the correct reality? I mean, that's what I get all the time. And luckily, there is social psychological studies that answer that question. What they find is that on matters of bias, the group that is most disempowered has the most accurate perception of reality. And this is not something innate to people, but I can just simply ask you the question, if you're a white woman working in corporate America that is dominated by white men, for you, a white woman, to do well, you have to really understand the thinking of your white male counterparts and the rules and regulations or policies and procedures of a Western white corporate world in order to do well. White men don't need to understand the thinking of white women to do well. And the same analogy applies to people of color. If I enter into an organization, a corporation that is primarily white in orientation, I need to really understand the thinking of white colleagues and white Western ways to do well, but they don't have to understand me as an Asian American. The other thing I frequently ask people is this, that if you really want to understand sexism, do you ask men or women? If you want to understand heterosexism, do you ask straights or gay? And likewise, if you want to understand racism, do you ask whites or people of color? The answer to me is obvious. And I see oftentimes in Congress where they'll be talking about things dealing with a women's right to health. And all the panelists are white men who are sitting there making the decisions. They really don't have the ability to empathize or understand completely the worldview of people who differ from them.